The Senate chamber was tense the moment Senator Chris Van Hollen leaned into his microphone. Cameras zoomed in, pens froze midair, and every reporter in the room sensed something big was about to unfold. His tone was measured, deliberate, the kind that slices through Washington noise without raising a single decibel. "Madam Attorney General," he began. "Yesterday, Arez Ruveni filed a whistleblower complaint against the Department of Justice. It wasn't just another hearing. It was a public reckoning. Ruveni wasn't some outsider with an axe to grind. He was a 15-year veteran of the DOJ, a man with commendations from both Republican and Democratic administrations. A name that had once stood for quiet excellence inside the department's walls. But now he stood accused of something radical, telling the truth. His testimony claimed he was fired for refusing to sign a legal brief he said was unsupported by evidence or the law. His words echoed across the nation, "I didn't sign up to lie." In that instant, the question hanging over the hearing wasn't just about one man's firing. It was about whether truth itself still had a seat inside America's most powerful legal institution. Van Hollen wasn't smiling. He wasn't grandstanding. He was laying a moral trap, a test of integrity. Because if the Attorney General of the United States couldn't say that honesty mattered more than loyalty, then the Department of Justice was already in deeper trouble than anyone wanted to admit. Senator Van Hollen didn't waste a second. He locked eyes with Attorney General Pam Bondi, his voice steady but sharp. "So let me ask you directly," he said. "You've said every DOJ lawyer must be a zealous advocate for the United States. But does that include lying to a court of law?" Bondi shifted in her seat, her expression firm but defensive. "Senator," she began, "this is pending litigation, and as you know, I can't discuss the details of an ongoing whistleblower case." Her tone was polished, the kind of Washington calm that hides chaos underneath. Then, as if rehearsed, she pivoted. She spoke not about truth or evidence, but about loyalty. "Arez Ruveni's timing," she said, "is suspect. His accusations target people I know well. Brilliant, honorable men. I stand by them completely." But Van Hollen wasn't interested in her loyalty. He was testing her integrity. Because in that moment it wasn't just a hearing, it was a moral crossroad. Bondi could have taken a stand for honesty, for the rule of law. Instead, she defended her circle, the insiders who made her look strong, and that's when the room shifted. Every senator watching understood. This wasn't about one fired lawyer anymore. It was about whether the nation's top law enforcement officer believed the truth was optional. Bondi's response did little to calm the room. Instead, it sparked something raw. Frustration, disbelief, even quiet anger. Senators leaned forward. Staffers whispered, and you could almost feel the collective thought running through the chamber. "She's dodging." Van Hollen pressed again. Not with volume, but precision. "So just to be clear," he said, "zealous advocacy doesn't mean telling untruths, correct?" Bondi nodded carefully, her answer wrapped in polished legal phrasing. "Zealous advocacy must always be ethical and honest," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, the damage was done. Her earlier defense of her deputies, her refusal to condemn the firing, it all hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot, because anyone watching could see what was really at stake. This wasn't a debate about one attorney's conduct. It was about the culture inside the Justice Department, a culture where questioning authority could cost you your career, and where loyalty seemed to outrank truth. Van Hollen's silence after her answer said more than any speech could. He knew the American people had just witnessed the mask slip, and once that happens in Washington, it's hard to put it back on. What came next revealed even more than Bondi's words. It revealed her priorities. Van Hollen shifted the conversation towards something that had been quietly alarming lawmakers for months: the Department of Justice's mysterious freeze on critical grant funding. These weren't abstract budget numbers. These were real programs that kept communities safe. Law enforcement training, victim services, local crime prevention, outreach programs that gave victims of violence a place to turn. Yet hundreds of grants had been cut or withheld without warning. "Madam Attorney General," Van Hollen asked, "why were these grants terminated? And when will the notices of funding go out?" Bondi straightened her papers, careful with her tone. "We did cut some grants by 6%, she said. "But if any senator here believes a grant in their state was unfairly cut, call me directly. I'll review it personally." To the casual listener, it sounded cooperative, but to anyone who's worked in Washington, it sounded like something else entirely. Politics dressed up as generosity. Because justice funding isn't supposed to depend on who can get the Attorney General on the phone. It's supposed to depend on fairness, on law, on need, and that's when it clicked for Van Hollen. The whistleblower's story and the grant freeze weren't separate issues. They were symptoms of the same disease, a Department of Justice more focused on control than truth. As Bondi continued, her tone softened, but her words didn't erase the unease spreading through the room. She promised transparency, said notices of funding would be released very shortly, and assured senators that appeals were already underway. But Van Hollen wasn't moved. He'd seen this pattern before. The polished promises, the vague timelines, the quiet shifting of responsibility until the outrage fades. What lingered wasn't her reassurance, but the silence underneath it. The stories of victims' shelters running out of funds, police departments forced to delay training, local programs shutting their doors because the DOJ needed more time. Those weren't bureaucratic glitches. They were lives left hanging in limbo. Van Hollen glanced down at his notes, then back up at Bondi. "I appreciate your assurances," he said slowly, "but we're hearing from people across the country who are desperate for clarity. These funds aren't favors, and they're obligations." For a moment, the hearing room went completely still. Because that was the point. Justice isn't a favor to be granted or withheld. It's a duty. And the longer Bondi dodged, the more obvious it became that this Justice Department wasn't just struggling with ethics, it was struggling with its soul. By the end of the hearing, one thing was painfully clear. This wasn't just a policy disagreement. It was a moral audit of the Department of Justice itself. Van Hollen hadn't come to score headlines or play partisan games. He came to defend something older and far more sacred, the idea that truth still matters in the halls of power. Arez Ruveni's words echoed again. "I didn't sign up to lie." 15 years of service, countless cases, and one defining moment of conscience. And for that he was punished. His story became a mirror reflecting everything America fears about its institutions. That integrity no longer guarantees protection, and that speaking up for honesty could cost you everything. Van Hollen's quiet persistence turned the hearing into something larger, a warning. Because when the top law enforcement agency in the nation treats truth-telling as rebellion and grants as political currency, democracy itself starts to decay from within. But there was also something defiant in that moment, a spark of resolve that couldn't be silenced. Because as long as there are whistleblowers willing to speak, senators willing to question, and citizens willing to pay attention, the truth still has a fighting chance. So remember this hearing. Remember the courage it took to say no when it mattered most. Because the future of justice in America won't be decided in one courtroom or one hearing. It will be decided by whether we, the people, still believe the truth is worth protecting.